Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's a special day for the beach cities to have so many amazing candidates for the state senate come and join us. I think anyone who was watching the State of the Union last night probably feels like these are tough times for our republic. But I think that when you look at California, when you look at this area in particular, we have an incredible opportunity that very rarely presents itself. It's been 12 years since we've had an open seat without an incumbent for the state senate, and we also happen to have an open seat for the state assembly this year as well. Our current senator, Ben Allen, has done incredible service for the South Bay, for Western Los Angeles. I've had the privilege of working on various issues with him, wildfire and insurance, and we're all going to miss him very dearly, but I'm inspired by the group of people that have thrown their hat in the ring to really, lace up their boots, come down here to the South Bay, and try to make a difference for our state, for our country. And so I hope all of you will join me in welcoming our candidates for state senate tonight. Just want to go through a couple of rules for the road tonight. It's going to be a pretty simple structure, this forum. What we're going to do is, because we have 7 candidates, and this is the first time that we've done this down here in the beach cities, we want to make sure that we're able to get as many questions from the audience as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask 2 questions, and each of you are going to be invited to answer these 2 questions with a time of 3 minutes per answer. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. And in order to give the audience the most amount of questions, the most amount of responses that we can, we're not going to have every single candidate answer every single question. We're going to do 3 candidates for each question, and then we're going to rotate to the next 3 candidates for the next question after that, and so on and so forth. We have 7 candidates here, so it'll run in a snake, like a circle like that. So with that, I think the most important question is, what has made you decide to take this enormously difficult step of entering this race? Tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, and tell us what makes you different from the other candidates that are sitting up here. We have so many great choices, we need help deciding. So we'll just go ahead and start with the person closest to me. Zennon, take it away.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to the Beach Cities for hosting us tonight. This is a wonderful turnout. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here. Thank you guys so much. My name is Zennon Ulyate-Cro, and I am proud to be running in the district that I was born and raised in. I love this place. There is no place on planet Earth like California. Today, it was 75 degrees and sunny. While the rest of this country was freezing their asses off. And that is the exact reason why my family came here 5 generations ago, started farming prunes in San Jose so that gold miners could have good almonds. And eventually they made their way down to Southern California and got involved as below-the-line workers in the entertainment industry. California is the land of infinite possibility. But today, I am staring down the barrel of being the first generation of my family to not have the same access to opportunity as the generations before me once had. I was appointed as the youngest commissioner in the city of Santa Cruz history, focusing on making our streets safer. I've founded a nonprofit in Sacramento that passed 4 pieces of legislation on affordable student housing and tenant protections, because so many students were unhoused at my school that 9% of people were living on the street. I worked on numerous congressional and Senate campaigns across this country, and eventually went to go work for the Progressive Outreach Team for the Biden campaign in DC. Upon coming home to Los Angeles, I landed a job as the executive director of a nonprofit in Santa Monica, working to make the city more affordable. Yet, through all of that, I still could not make enough money to move out of my parents' house. And in fact, I still live there today. These are the issues that are facing our generation. We are seeing that the entry-level jobs that once were guaranteed are now shrinking, both because of the economy and because of a changing automated workforce. But just because Gen Z is acutely feeling these issues, that doesn't mean that the rest of Californians aren't feeling it too. It's politics as usual that has led to this outcome. I believe that government works best when it represents the people that it represents. And right now, there's not a single Gen Z member in the entire California state. We are nearly 30 years old as a generation, and that needs to change. The California dream was not just about sunshine, it was about access to opportunity. And that's why I am so strongly in this fight to make sure that we can fight right-wing fascism in this state and show that Democrats can deliver on their promises. California has the opportunity to be that shining beacon. I'm running because I refuse to believe that the California dream should shrink with every generation. I'm running because every single family should have the opportunity to have their kids grow up in a better environment than they were raised in. And I believe that we deserve something more, not just more of the same.
Thank you. Dr. Roy, the floor is yours. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here, meeting so many folks here, and I know many of you in the audience. My name is Shai Roy. I'm a physician at Harvard UCLA, just down the street here in Torrance. I'm a cardiologist. I've served as a physician there for 15 years. My wife's a physician. I was former president of the LA County Medical Association, and what sets me apart, and the reason I want to do this, the reason my wife lets me do this, is healthcare. The population that I serve in South LA is the reason that I think I can make a difference up in Sacramento. We're facing drastic Medicaid cuts from the federal level that is cost shifted to the state. The state has now taken so many of our vulnerable communities, including undocumented friends and neighbors here in South LA, off of Medi-Cal. And that is not only socially unjust, but it is a cost shift and it's bad for the taxpayer, and it's fiscally unwise. And so we're losing 2 physicians in the state assembly and leaving 1 in Akila Weber in the state senate, and maybe a couple other people with healthcare backgrounds. And as we get to this inflection point, that is going to affect everybody in this district when they look for primary care providers, when something bad happens to them, regardless of insurance, and they go to Harvard, and they have to wait days, not hours, for in the emergency room. We need people who come from the system, come from the safety net, to go help navigate the next decade as we face this healthcare crisis that was already there before Trump and has just gotten worse. The 1A reason is we lost our home in the Palisades fire. And we have an 8-year-old, and we very much thought, is this the right thing for our family to do together this year? And giving voice to a fire-threatened community on issues like rebuilding as quickly and safely as possible, fire mitigation, insurance stabilization, making fire-safe rebuilding affordable in California. That is a huge part of the Senate district that threatens areas of the Santa Monica Mountains all the way down to the South Bay, and we need that voice up in Sacramento to take that experience up there. I'm also chair of the Santa Monica College Trustees, and my constituency is Santa Monica and Malibu, and former PTA president for my son's school, leadership position of necessity, not choice. So education is something that's critically important to me as well. And I look forward to getting to know you here over the next hour and a half, and proud to say that I was just endorsed by the California Democratic Party over the weekend, and the reason is I've led in every part of this district over the last 15 years. I know this district, and I look forward to meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Mike, the floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Watch out. How's everybody doing tonight? Great. Good to see you all. Mike Newhouse. It's nice to be amongst a lot of friends in this room. As you know, maybe I spend too much time in the South Bay. I often get teased as whether or not I'm moving down here. Us beach folk, we got to stick together, right? I've been up in Venice for the last 30 years. I've been married to my wife 24 years. We've got 2 wonderful sons who are freshmen and seniors in high school. Why am I running is the core of this question. It's really for them and for that generation. I think Zennon hit it right on the head. Look, this generation, everybody coming after it, is in very, very dire chance of losing the California dream. Everybody up here agrees with our California values. There's not a person up here, I think, that would say anything different about what California stands for, the beacon of hope we are to this country, and standing up against the crap we heard last night on television and we've been hearing for the better part of the last 10 years. What's different about me, though? Well, I think what we're not doing right is the California dream part of things. I think what we're not doing right is that 1992 Bill Clinton blue dog, it's the economy, stupid Democrat. We're missing that. I'm a small business owner. I signed the front of a paycheck for 8 people in my small law firm. I've done that for 20 years. I know what it's like to be a payroll. I know what it's like to have to pay those taxes. I know how hard it is to start a business. I'm also a real estate broker. I own a small brokerage. And what it informs you, I think, when you have that experience is you realize that the affordability crisis we're talking about right now, a lot of it is self-inflicted. We gotta get out of our way. Why do we have an affordable housing crisis? Because we haven't built housing in 30 years. Why? Because we've over-regulated and made it too hard to build housing. One of the big parts of my real estate, my law practice, is housing. I represent a lot of builders of housing, especially affordable housing projects. And I spent the better part of the last 10 years on the LA City Planning Commission, first appointed by Mayor Garcetti, after that by Mayor Bass. And I can tell you with no certainty in my voice, people want to build here in Los Angeles and California. We are making it too hard. We got to get out of our own way. That doesn't mean SB 79 get out of our own way. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. That means keeping good, healthy local control and making sure that we're adaptively reusing buildings we already have, turning them from office and retail to housing, urban infilling in areas which are already dense and made for density where we can actually build new housing, right? Last fall is environment. I'm a beach kid. I've lived in Venice for 30 years. I'm in the water. My kids are in the water. My whole educational background is based in environmental science in college, and my law degree is in natural resources law. And I've been a practicing environmental attorney in the CEQA space, in California Coastal Act space, and in the toxics remediation space for the last 30 years. We need an expert in environment like Ben Allen. We need a Ben Allen 2.0 in this seat. It's one of the things that I bring to the table that is unique, important, and it's extremely important in this community. The last thing I'd say is, in terms of beach cities, while I haven't cracked Hermosa yet, I'm proud to have the endorsement of 2 Redondo Beach City Council members, the head of the Planning Commission in Redondo, and Redondo Beach Police Officers Association has just endorsed me
Thank
as
you,
well.
Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from John next.
I'm just glad Mike left his shirt on this time if you're at the Dem Party convention. He took his clothes off and showed us all his tattoos. So that's a fun time if you want to go there. I'm John Erickson. I'm a council member and the former mayor of the city of West Hollywood. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm running because I know how much is my bank account. I know how much my bills are every month. I know the cost of rent that keeps going up. And I know from local experience, balancing budgets and making sure we have sound fiscal policies are the standout hallmarks of what we really need to do as elected officials. That's why when I was mayor of the city of West Hollywood, we had a $31 million budget surplus because we directly invested that back into care for not only our social services, but our fire, our sheriff's department, as well as making sure that we are banking all that for a rainy day, which, as we know in California, seems to be coming every year when we get the budget up at the state. And we're wondering, where are we going to pay for this? And right now, you are all being asked to pay for corporations and billionaires to get off of their butts and actually have to pay what they should be doing, because we actually don't need new taxes in this country. We can just make sure the people that have the money can pay their fair share. And that's ultimately where we go to looking at how we fight and get back to make sure healthcare is fully funded, making sure our schools are fully funded, that teachers aren't being asked to get their own supplies or stay late without pay or have to go onto a picket line because their school boards aren't negotiating in good faith. These are things the state can solve. But most importantly, I'm running because my day job right now as the chief of staff for an organization, a Latino advocacy organization called Alliance for a Better Community, is standing up to the Trump administration every day by making sure individuals are fighting back against ICE like we all are. It was great to be down here a couple weeks ago in Manhattan Beach where we all walked from there to Hermosa to see the South Bay and such amazing colors. It was so great to see so many of you. But ultimately the attacks on the LGBTQ community, the women's reproductive health community, and the fight that we have to face in Sacramento to say, we are California, we are Senate District 24, and we're not going to take it like this. And I've been standing up to the Trump administration and every other bigoted administration since then by saying and pushing progressive, bold leadership and policies like raising the minimum wage to the highest in the country and now nation. And just right now the state will come back and we'll get over at Portland eventually, but making sure workers have a little bit more in their pockets. That's why I'm endorsed by the California, the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, plus a whole host of different organizations that you can read on my website at johnericssonforsenate.com. And I really look forward to another fun conversation. Forum 64, I think we're at right now, but you all deserve to make sure you know who you're voting for in this primary. And I look forward to meeting you now as well as afterwards.
Thank you, John.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ellen Evans. I'm an LGBTQ rights activist, a community leader, and a mom. And I've spent decades fighting for civil rights and organizing communities to deliver real change. Right now, we're in a really dangerous moment. Trump and his minions are harming our democracy and harming our people, and we can and will fight that. But here's why I'm up here. For years, I've watched talented candidates run, win, and pass strong legislation. But somewhere along the way, great legislation stopped translating into meaningful differences for families. Housing is still unaffordable, energy costs are going up, utilities are still starting fires, transportation projects are still delayed, and we've spent billions on homelessness, and we don't know what it's gotten us. California doesn't have a values problem, we have an execution problem. We set great policies and great goals, but we don't consistently get to the root of an issue or plan our path or consider unintended consequences. We don't consistently make sure that our policies are delivering for the people, delivering the results people need. And too often, bureaucracy delays what needs to be done or sidelines programs altogether. And that problem doesn't fix itself. For years, I've organized from the ground up. I built a neighborhood association, I organized residents, and I took problems directly to city departments and to our city council. And I organized coalitions outside of City Hall and persisted with departments until we got clear answers and real progress. That's not glamorous work, that's the work that makes governments deliver and function. And it's the kind of work we need in Sacramento. We've relied heavily on the traditional political pipeline. But if we're going to be honest, that pipeline hasn't always delivered the results people want to see. Sometimes we need leadership from people outside the system, people with different experiences, people with different perspectives, people with a different skill set, and a relentless focus on results. I'm running because California needs leadership that cares as much about implementation as about ambition, turning our climate goals into a real path, into executable plans, removing the real barriers that keep housing from being built, hardening our infrastructure so we're actually fire safe, and training kids, and young people and adults too, I guess, for the jobs that are going to lead us into the future. And that's how we make the California dream reachable. California can fight and deliver at the same time.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be, can I just say my endorsement?
Please, yes.
I'm honored to be endorsed by the California Women's Legislative Caucus and Jewish Legislative Caucus and leaders like Councilmember Nitya Raman and Assemblymember Rick Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thanks to this fantastic group for listening to all of us. It's an honor to be here. As some of you know, running for office was not really part of my plan. I was a journalist for a long time. I worked at places like CNN and The Atlantic and CBS News, where I was Katie Couric's political producer. And then somewhere along the way, my plan shifted because Donald Trump became president. And I thought just covering politics wasn't sufficient to meet the moment that we're in. I had to work to help change politics. And so I left Yahoo News, where I was, and went to work for Pete Buttigieg on his presidential campaign in 2019. And then when that campaign ended, I went to work for lots of Democrats around the country who were trying to fight back against MAGA, and just as importantly, fight for a vision of America where the middle class is rising again, where life is affordable again. And I think two things changed my view on running. One was the 2024 election, not just the outcome, but the way that California became kind of exhibit A in the Republicans' case against our party. And as loathsome as so many of the people are making those arguments, as much of these arguments are true, if we are, being honest with ourselves, as some of these arguments are lies and distortions. It is too hard for the middle class in California. It is too challenging and expensive for small businesses. There are a lot of people leaving to places like Nevada and Arizona and Texas to build a good life for themselves and their families. The second thing that changed was the fires that hit very close to home in Palisades and Malibu. We now know that these fires were preventable. They were mismanaged at every stage, before, during, and after. And one of the critical roles of a legislator that I think has been understated over the last several years in deferring to governors, deferring to your fellow Democrats, is holding people in power accountable for results, asking hard questions, asking, as Ellen says, not just where are the good laws, what are the good intentions, but where are the outcomes and the results. There are a lot of excuses that you hear from Sacramento. One of the most prevalent is, well, we don't have the money to provide affordable child care for everyone. We don't have the money to provide a great K through 12 education for every kid in every zip code. We don't have the money to fix our roads and our infrastructure and to build mass transit. We don't have the money to provide everyone affordable housing. And that simply is not true. I actually looked this up. The last year Jerry Brown was governor, the state budget was $208 billion. 7 years later, the most recent budget is $349 billion. So somehow there's no money, but we're spending $140 billion a year more than we did just 7 years ago. And our outcomes dramatically better? Is life easier? Healthcare more accessible? Schools dramatically better for our kids? We need more people up there who are willing and able to ask hard questions, to produce results, to deliver outcomes. And I guess, since it seems to be the rule up here, I'll close with my endorsements. I'm very proud and honored to be supported by a mix of national leaders like Secretary Hillary Clinton, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Barbara Boxer, who's the chair of my campaign, Pete Buttigieg, and a lot of local leaders, local mayors, city council members, school board members, and others, to give me that perspective on the ground, because I think so much of what's happened in Sacramento is, they're doing legislation to communities, not necessarily always with communities. And so I want to be the kind of legislator that brings together local leaders and, hears their views and takes their input both before and after the legislative process to make sure that things are actually being implemented properly. Sorry about that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Last but certainly not least, my fellow Eric, please take
Thank
the
you,
floor.
Eric. Great name. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thank you to the club for hosting the event. And it's good to see so many faces out here. My name is Eric Alegria. And many of you have gotten to know me as of late. I'm quite a simple person, really. I believe in my community. I have two great loves, which is my community and my family, father of four. As a young man, I worked with farm workers alongside them through my teens and early 20s, which eventually led to me leading a nonprofit program to support some of those same farm workers. So I got to sit in living rooms and understand that hard work sometimes just isn't enough. Sometimes you need that extra step of opportunity as well. That spirit has led my life, my community service, of which I've had 17 plus years in the South Bay, starting with initially leading the very first environmental committee of the city of El Segundo, and culminating the last 15 plus years in elected and appointed service to the Palos Verdes Peninsula, as a city council member for 2 terms, mayor during part of that time, school board member in Palos Verdes currently. I'm running because I want to remove obstacles for families. I'm running because right now I've talked to too many people who feel just simply unheard, that government's not working for them, that solutions aren't coming. And really I'm a results-oriented Democrat, and for me it's about the proof in producing results. As a city council member in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes, I was very pleased to lead efforts that led to that our city being the 4th safest city in all of California at the time. The only city that was in LA County. We need more public safety, and in my work along the Palos Verdes Preserve, we ensure that we have fire mitigation plans, including the advent of technologies to ensure our fire readiness. Those principles and learnings apply all across this district. I'm running to protect the quality of life in this district, particularly along our coastal communities. I've fought against what I've considered to be the overreach in Sacramento at times in terms of changing the planning of our communities, knowing that really our local leaders know best what's right for their community and how to plan their community in a way that makes sense to their residents. I'm ready to support that. I'm also running to ensure that we protect our environment. As a city council member, I was pleased to acquire new lands, expand trails, and produce really what is a preserve that's going to be utilized by our entire LA County area for many generations to come. We have big challenges in front of us right now, and people want to feel heard. People are looking for leadership that has actually done it, produced results. And we have, in light of all the challenges, educational access, healthcare access, and 20 years of service in healthcare, and the chief operating officer for a public health company, I've produced those outcomes. We need to solve problems. We need to talk to each other and collaborate in a way that's going to do that, and I have a background in doing so. But it's really not about me as a candidate or my fellow candidates here. It's about you and what we want and what we need next. So I look forward to the conversation in front of us, and I'll just conclude by saying I'm very, very proudly endorsed by dozens and dozens of local electeds, particularly in the South Bay area, some in this room, supported by Anthony Rendon, our former Speaker of California Assembly, John Chang, our former treasurer, the deputy district attorneys of Los Angeles, IBW 40, and many, many others. So I appreciate the time. I thank my colleagues again. As John, I think, joked, we have had, I think, the most democratic process for this seat in the state. So I thank my colleagues, and it's been a pleasure to get to know all of you through this process. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question that we want to ask all of you, it's a big one, perhaps the big one, and it's about housing. Now, for those of you that don't know, my name's Eric, and I grew up here in Hermosa Beach. I'm very pleased to be able to host you here in this town. We have an incredible community that has large diversity of housing. We have trailer parks, we have large apartment buildings, we have small duplexes, and everything in between. And I think that there's been an affordability crisis in this town that has brewed over time. I think we can feel that. I look around, I don't see a lot of kids that I grew up with still living in this town. But at the same time, I'm looking in the audience and I see that we have a couple of our city councilmen from Hermosa Beach, and they have struggled to understand, I think, the position of the state in a town like Hermosa where, we're essentially built out. We have quite a bit of density already. We're trying to figure out how to comply with state law and how to retain the character of our town while also providing opportunities for young people to live here and for people to grow old here. So my question for all of you is, how do you look at the challenges facing a town like Hermosa Beach with regards to state housing? How do you think about state housing mandates in general, local control versus the necessity to create standards that we can create housing in the state? And what do you think, if you desire to comment on it, about SB 79? Thank you.
All right, so the juicy questions first. Here's what I'll say about housing. Just to talk from personal experience, the first thing that I ever got involved in was housing advocacy. In the 10th grade, I was really passionate about climate change and realized if we want to tackle 50% of our emissions, which are transportation-based emissions, people need to be able to live next to trains. People need to be able to live next to their jobs. And they need to be able to rely on transportation modes outside of single occupancy vehicles. And through that work, I've worked on legislation at the state level to make it easier to build affordable student housing on college campuses where it makes sense, so students don't have to commute miles and miles every single day. They can walk from their dorm to their classroom. That same philosophy, I think, extends to housing policy in general. We need to be building housing, full stop, point blank, and especially we need to be building affordable housing. I think so much of us have talked today about deliverability and the government's ability to deliver, and especially on the issue of housing, that is the preeminent issue with it, is that we are not delivering on it. The barriers to building housing right now are not zoning constraints. They are the building codes and the financing mechanisms that make it so expensive to build what we have already said in our communities we would like to build. I'm fully in support of making sure that we reform how we do our building codes in the state of California, and we do things where we take out some of the veto authority that we have seen at the local level, because in the end, that is how we've had this housing crisis, is that we've had a reverse tragedy of the commons, where each individual city in our region says, oh, not here, this isn't the right place, let's do it somewhere else. And to be clear, there are the right places to build housing, next to transit, next to job centers, in places where there's the infrastructure. And that's why we need to improve government deliverability so that we can have the infrastructure to support this housing. But at the same point, there is a strong need for the state to step in on these issues, because without the state intervention, we have seen the past 60, 70 years of local control. We've seen what that's done to our economy and our housing crisis. And as a young person who is struggling to afford a house, that is the most acute issue for me today. Generational home ownership and generational wealth building through home ownership is not accessible because we have not been building enough housing. So I challenge everybody here to take a step back and think about the next generation. Think about how there needs to be more housing in our environment if we want to make sure that our kids can continue to grow up here, and that California can be the sanctuary state that we want it to be, because we have fantastic social policy here in California, but if we aren't delivering economic justice and making sure that California dream isn't just reserved for those that are wealthy enough to live here, then we aren't doing it right.
Thank you, Zennon.
Thank you. Look, the biggest driver of unaffordability here in our district is housing. It's people who work at Santa Monica College can't live near where they work, and it's driven by the price of renting and owning their home. And I do think, though, that it is very difficult to legislate a district like this from Sacramento. You know, there's three distinct parts of this district. One is the Santa Monica Mountains, and that's about a quarter of the district. And the biggest issue there is fire, and then rebuilding after the fires. And so, we're seeing all of the different barriers. We don't have permits to rebuild our home, and we're seeing all of those barriers, and that's a very big issue for the next decade in the district that is very difficult to legislate from Sacramento. Then you have Santa Monica, West LA, into West Hollywood. Rent stabilization is a huge driver of affordability in these areas. And you asked about SB 79. I think that the goals of SB 79 are wonderful, in terms of building housing next to transit. But SB 79 didn't adequately take into account, a lot of rent-controlled homes where people are aging in place around those transit corridors. And what is going to happen to those folks with that redevelopment around those corridors? And then you come down to the South Bay that has a mix of a higher density than the Santa Monica Mountains, but also some of the same geological issues, the same fire threats, landslides and Palos Verdes, the beach issues with erosion. And so, we need more density, and I'm a big believer in targeting that with local control, working with local neighborhoods. I'll give you an example. It's possible. When I first came on the Santa Monica College Board of Trustees, the state's solution to homeless students in community colleges is living in cars in parking lots. You know, many of you have been to college and school. That's no way to start your life. That's no way to get an education. That's not the solution. And so when I first started, you know, the surrounding neighborhood was not pro-housing at Santa Monica College. Our administration was not pro-housing, and most of our board, other than one other board member, was not pro-housing. But we started that conversation, and over the next 5 years, we changed. You know, now the neighborhood accepts it, the administration supports it, and our board supports it, and now it's about putting the funding together. And we've had, you know, state support, and so doing that city by city, project by project, is really important in our district that is so unique in its geography.
Thanks, folks. So, look, everybody up here has areas of expertise, right? As I talked about a little bit before, there are 2 areas of expertise that I bring for 3 decades to this race. First of all is building affordable housing. Number 2 is environmental policy. And I can tell you in no uncertain terms, having served on the LA City Planning Commission for the better part of the last 10 years, having represented people who built affordable housing for the last 30 years, having developed affordable housing myself, we are not going to solve this problem by eviscerating local control. It's not going to fix the problem. SB 79 is wrong-headed because of that fatal flaw. What we need to be doing is we need to be taking existing resources we have, which are never going to be used for their retail or for their office purposes again. We need to adaptively reuse those buildings into housing. Environmentally, we are not tearing out resources. We are not adding new resources. We are not bringing haul routes in and out of communities when we tear down buildings. When those buildings are redone, they're electrified, they're LEED certified, and you're creating housing where it belongs, where it already is dense, where you already have transit, and you're not coming up with artificial things like REMA goals that have no real world application to somewhere like the South Bay. Feel free to apply, thank you. Having said all that, what we have to look at is larger policies, like are we gonna have a state senator who says, REMA goals need to be allocated in a different way. I'm an expert on this subject, and I couldn't tell you to save my life how REMA goals are actually calculated. Nobody can. But I'll tell you what we need to start with. Instead of hitting them, I know Zennon will tell you he knows exactly how they're calculated. We've had this discussion. Having said that, we respectfully disagree. Having said that, the first thing you do is you don't hit it municipality by municipality. You say, what are the REMA goals for an entire county? And then the county talks with its municipalities and figures out where can we make our numbers? How can we adaptively reuse buildings? How can we use urban infill in areas which already have buildings to fill a lot, which is currently empty but surrounded by tall buildings, by transit? How do we build up that space rather than encroaching into communities that are not only already too dense, but it's a real safety issue. It's a very real safety issue trying to get in and out of a community where you can barely move anyhow, and you're going to add a bunch more density to it. So we have to look at the unintended consequences. SB 79 gets 90% of it right. It does. The goals are laudable. The problem is you are stripping away the actual mechanism to make a difference. And the worst part of it is, in SB 79, not only do you not have an affordability requirement, there is a minuscule, almost inapplicable or affordability requirement. You're going to get a lot of market rate condos, and it disincentivizes transit. If I live in a community that doesn't have an SB 79 half-mile or quarter-mile radius, you think I want transit coming into my community and transforming my community into an SB 79 area? That's the other part of the problem that we have to deal with. So we have to look at long-term consequences. We have to look at unintended consequences. We should build where we can adaptively reuse what we have and infill spaces we already have.
So this is an economics issue for me. In the city of West Hollywood, the reason why we have such a budget surplus is because we're actually developing and building in our communities. And when I did my own streamlining item at the same time SB 79 was going about in the city of West Hollywood, it actually came down to bureaucratic load. How many of you here have gone to your city hall to try to get a permit? And let me tell you, I'm so sorry. But it's gonna take you years, if not decades. And you know how much money that is? It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I did my own streamlining item in West Hollywood, something that I modeled carefully with affordable housing advocates, renters, everyone, we really found out that one application for a multi-family housing unit of 200 units was sitting on a planner's desk for 2 years, and it cost that person $1.6 million to have it sit there. That's money that can go into your communities, to invest into your schools, into sheriff, into police, into fire. That's the problem. The problem isn't sitting up here and saying, yes, we're not building, right? That's just first and foremost. But the problem is we have to look inward. And a lot of city councils, and I really have to say, talking with my friend Ray and Hermosa and everywhere else down here in the South Bay, you are working very diligently to not only meet RENA numbers, to make sure you're getting to where you gotta go, because I gotta tell you, the next cycle of RENA numbers is gonna be horrific for a lot of communities. And we need people not only in the state legislature who have worked on this type of legislation for decades, like I have, but specifically when it comes down to drafting this legislation, it's critical that someone is in the room on day one. I will be that person. And that's because I've not only done this as a planning commissioner in the city of West Hollywood, where I know local land use and zoning, and it's the stuff that no one wants to read at 2 in the morning right before our planning commission, but it's what matters to you. And also for homeowners, at the end of the day, no one should actually tell you what you should do with your property, because that's where we also face this thing. We can hate one bill, right? But the moment you might want to sell your home, which is your right, your investment, your retirement, your social safety net in that way, you should still be able to have that right to do it, to develop, to build, and however, to make sure you can live the rest of your life the way you want to. I think we got 30 seconds left. I do want to say there is an affordability housing requirement in SB 79. I want to say that the bill was gutted to take away bus lanes, so that therefore the transit advocate aspect of SB 79 could have been a lot more I think robust in how we're actually building along transit. And I'll leave you with this. Every local city council member, when they have a planning commission decision or a commission decision before them, they look and we really want to say we should be building along local transit corridors. That's really at the essence what SB 79 is really trying to do. We want to build along local transit corridors. Infill housing was already put on part of the budget as a statewide policy. But if we're going to build along local transit corridors, where we want metro, we want the expansion of transit, so we can get out of our cars, we don't have to drive 20 miles, or in my case, sit in the car, drive to LAX and fly here from West Hollywood. That's a little bit of a joke, as you know. But what I'm saying is that's the future we can deliver, and with the right policymakers, we can achieve.
Thank you, John.
So RENA numbers make it really hard for small cities, right? Because you have to plan, your tax base might completely change if you turn something from a commercial area into a residential area. It's really not fair, I think, for Sacramento to be doing that without providing funding for the infrastructure you're gonna need, extra schools you might need. And I do, like Mike, I think favor a regional approach. Because when we drive around, we see a lot of space, right? There actually is a lot of space in Southern California. And I've talked to a lot of developers about why they're not building, what would make them build in our area. And the primary reason is what John said, the time it takes to get their shovel in the ground. And I think that's something we can actually improve on. So first of all, for affordable housing, we have an incredibly complicated system in the state. There are multiple different funding mechanisms in different departments with different applications and different timelines. And if we can consolidate those and make it easier for developers to develop affordable housing, get their shovel in the ground, then I think we can change the game. Also, we used to have redevelopment agencies which put together underutilized commercial and industrial land and produced thousands of affordable units a year and other units as well. And I think we need to look at bringing something like that back because it was working. And it's also great to develop underutilized commercial and industrial space because nobody gets displaced while you're doing it. And then I think another approach I would take is to legislate timelines and make sure that all the departments in all municipalities need to approve in lockstep so that approvals happen faster. And I think that normally in reality, it's often the utility companies that are holding up projects, and we need to make sure utility companies are putting their stamp on projects earlier, because when your project is delayed, as John said, years and years, you're paying interest every single year on your land, and if we can cut that timeline, we can make a real difference in what can and will get built. Thank you.
Thank you.
So here's the problem with SB 79. For the handful of counties it targets, including Los Angeles County, it says it doesn't matter how much work you put into your housing plan. It doesn't matter how much effort and time went into hearings and consultation and looking at land use patterns and transportation patterns. Sacramento's going to come in and impose a one-size-fits-all solution on every city in every county that's affected, no matter what the locals have to say. So we have to make a decision as a state. Are we going to have local planning or aren't we going to have local planning? I believe in a process of local planning held to high standards, by which I mean, I agree with Mike and others, we need to reform and regionalize the RENA process. The goals need to be reasonable. And then if the question is how and where to build housing, not whether to build, how and where to build housing, not whether to build housing, we need to defer to local planning. We need to hold people accountable to reasonable goals. A couple of additional things. California has 1 out of 4 homeless people in the United States of America. That translates to almost 200,000 people who are homeless in the richest state, in the richest country in the history of the world. That is a moral failure, it is an economic failure, it is a humanitarian failure. And part of the solution is we cannot wait to build new units of housing at $800,000 or $900,000 a door. We don't do anything else the way we did it 50 years ago. We shouldn't build housing the way we did it 50 years ago. So we should use modular and manufactured housing to provide clean, safe, dignified homes for everybody. There is nothing progressive about anybody sleeping on the streets ever. LAUSD, by the way, says that 17,000 children in their system are considered functionally homeless. That is an outrage. That should not be allowed to happen. Then for people who are a little higher up on the economic spectrum, people who were lucky enough to buy a home in the 80s or the 90s, or even, I guess we're calling it the aughts, the 2000s, their kids and grandkids may not be able to afford to live here. I think Zennon hit the nail on the head. This is the great question of our time for not just young people, but pretty much everybody under 50. How do you put it together to actually own a home here, build generational wealth, raise your kids here instead of moving to, somewhere else? And there is a lot we can do. Number one, we should use publicly owned land. The counties, the cities, even the state owns a lot of non-environmentally sensitive land that is not in the middle of existing communities. And if we provide below market land leases to developers, they can make money on every unit of affordable. Don't get me started on housing, we could talk about this all night. But thank you for your time.
I hope we get the chance.
Appreciate this conversation. I think we'd all agree that when you look at the beauty of coastal Los Angeles County 20 years from now, and you try to imagine what it'll look like, this is one of the more fundamental questions, I think, in this race. I think it requires, a lot of thought and balance. My record is incredibly clear on this particular topic. I do think multiple things can simultaneously be true. As you mentioned earlier, there's an opportunity to improve affordability and to consider how do you go about doing that. But we can't do it at the cost of the folks in our communities or over the heads of our local leaders. That's essential. It needs to be collaborative and cooperative. And unfortunately, But I would kind of qualify over the last 5 to 6 years, we've had examples of legislation from Sacramento that is near overreaction. There are bad actor cities, they need to be addressed. The process itself needs to be improved. As a master's in public administration student, I worked for what was once the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles more than 20 years ago and helped rewrite the housing policy. Ultimately, the economics for housing to be developed in a way that work for that particular community or for that developer need to be really intricately thought through. And much of what's being produced by some of the more recent legislation, to me, hasn't produced affordability. It may have produced some more volume, but not address the actual issue that's espousing to try and address. I see some of our local leaders in the room, and I can say I sat for hundreds and hundreds of hours in front of people having this discussion and getting a reaction, understandably, from the community saying, how could this be so? Builder's remedy, this idea that somehow you could take a single family community and out of nowhere sort of insert a very out-of-step project. We have to be thoughtful. As a city council member and mayor, I led the effort to appeal our RENA numbers. It wasn't because I disagreed with the issue of affordability. It's because a big portion of our community was in a high fire severity zone with limited ingress and egress. And of course, this is 4 to 5 years before the tragedies of the Palisades last year. We have to think about climate change. We have to be very microscopic in how we think about the right planning for communities. How do we get there then? How do we address affordability? We got to utilize existing infrastructure where it makes sense. Some of my colleagues mentioned some ideas that I'm fond of. I have a problem with SB 79 as well. I would not have supported it because it usurps local control. I think the state can create a framework that allow the cities themselves and to cooperate regionally. We do have concepts such as the South Bay Regional Housing Trust. And as a 3-year member of the South Bay Council of Governments, I cooperated with many of my cities, and we said, gosh, it's unfortunate that we can't figure out a way to make projects together for a density where my teachers and police officers can be adjacent or near my community. So regional cooperation, use of existing infrastructure need to be really thought of before the floodgates are open to developers just to build a building.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate the robust discussion on housing, and that we have local reporters in the room, and we've had a robust debate in our community about it, so I'm sure that they'll look forward to reading about it in the paper. With this, we'd really like to open it up to the audience. We're going to change it up a little bit just so we can get through as many questions. As I said, we're going to have 3 candidates in a row issue each question that is asked, and each candidate is going to be limited to 2 minutes now so that we can move through more questions. I saw a hand over here first, Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Ray Jackson, City of Hermosa Beach. Thank you all for being here. I will try to be very brief because I know we want everyone to be able to ask their questions. So if we need to stay over late, let's do it. Housing, the never-ending. Everyone says affordability, affordability, affordability. You go to Sacramento, that's the most important issue facing the city, the state, is affordability. But none of the legislation that's being jammed down our throats addresses affordability. And it's never-ending frustration. SB 79, when you just go down the list, it's a developer's dream, it's the YIMBY's dream. There's a thought that if we sprinkled fairy dust over our entire district and said, tomorrow we have 1,000 units like that, not a single one of those will be affordable. Not a single one. So we keep talking about, the impediments and the reason we can't build and all that. But the reality is, unless affordability is mandated, nothing's going to be affordable. Pick a number, 10,000 units. They're not going to be affordable. You're not going to be able to afford it then. None of you guys are. None of us can. So there's a never-ending frustration. So there's a question in there somewhere about, we know what we should be doing, and we hear, we need to do this, we need to do that, but we can't do anything at the local level because our hands are tied. So market rate housing is not going to solve this. Every piece of legislation we get is market rate housing, YIMBY, market rate, and we all know trickle-down economics doesn't work, and trickle-down housing won't work. So there's a question in here, how do you get affordability?
2 minutes, then you're up.
Let me decipher this one really quickly. Well, I couldn't agree more. Look, building new housing keeps rents stable, doesn't make them more affordable, and that's over a 20 to 30 year horizon. I mean, you think about it, when it comes to a developer building housing, rents need to be expensive to justify the cost of building that building. And if rents go down in costs, then all of a sudden you stop building market rate buildings because you're not generating enough revenue, so you wait for the rents to rise again until you do it. It's about keeping rents stagnant, is what building market rate housing does. But what we need is for rents to be affordable. I need to be able to afford a place to live. And I think it's really interesting that we've all talked about deliverability tonight. We've all talked about what are we going to do to make it happen. And we agree on so much about how we need to reform our building departments, how we need to reform how we actually deliver these things. And I'll give you a story about how I actually did change how we deliver things, because that's going to be the difference, is how we get things done in Sacramento. So in these pieces of legislation that I worked with, the nonprofit that I started called Student Homes Coalition, we had a bill called AB 3116 that was going to allow affordable student housing off campus, directly adjacent to campuses. No brainer, make it easy to build affordable housing for students. We got rapid support from all sorts of different members of the legislature, everybody was on board, and then we went to our first committee consultant. Now, for those of you that don't know, there are the committees that deal with different issue areas in Sacramento, and there are consultants that staff those committees. And this consultant told me, oh, sorry, your bill's gonna build too much affordable student housing, and so we're gonna kill it. Which is insane, right? It's because they said that, well, if there's too much affordable student housing, then there won't be enough affordable housing of other types. There won't be enough senior affordable housing. There won't be enough youth affordable housing. There won't be enough veterans affordable housing. And that zero-sum thinking is exactly what leads us to the crisis of today. That thinking is exactly why Sacramento's not working. And guess what? Because I'm a Gen Zer, we did a workaround, we used social media, and we got that bill through that committee and signed it into law. And today, that is producing affordable student housing units across this state. So that's what I'm bringing to the table. I'm bringing to the table a new type of politics that's not doing it the way it's always been done. Thank you.
Thank you. If you're going to build affordable housing, you have to build affordable housing, not 10% affordable housing, not 15% affordable housing. And that's what the solutions from Sacramento have primarily been over the last decade. And, of course, there is a role for private development. The measures are in place from Sacramento, but it's SB 9, SB 10, SB 79, those are the laws of the land right now. They've been signed into law. And, but my focus, just because you have those laws in place doesn't mean that anything is going to be built. All of those projects face litigation unless they are, approved by local neighborhoods or supported by local neighborhoods, facing litigation and, an inability to potentially put money together for the next decade. My real focus will be on bringing people together to support redevelopment agencies like Community Core, which has built hundreds of units of affordable housing in Santa Monica and West LA. And they look at primarily affordable housing, and they are looking for ways to put money together. And the role of the state senator in this district is to help make the connections to finance these projects so that people can afford to live near where they work. And in Santa Monica, for example, there is a huge amount of development that is going on in downtown, along our Wilshire corridor, Ocean Park corridor, and the problem is that many of the apartments are so expensive that they sit empty even once they're there.
Thank you, Sean.
So affordable housing means affordable housing.
Thank you.
Ray, you hit the problem right on the head, and the issue is not just that there's not legislation targeting it. The problem is we're trying to force affordable housing through a stick approach as opposed to a carrot approach. So I'll give my own journey on the issue. About 15 years ago, I started developing student housing, strictly affordable student housing down by USC and also up in San Luis Obispo. What we realized is in both cities, if you were going to do a 100% affordable student housing project, all the entitlement process was rocked down to about 60 days, shovel in the ground, okay? Fast forward to when Mayor Bass got elected, a lot of us planning commissioners got together and met with her about a vision for what we thought would help the affordability crisis. And one of the ideas that came out of this was what's called Executive Directive 1, you might know, which essentially the city of Los Angeles, they do a lot of things wrong, but they're doing this right. They essentially said, if you develop a 100% affordable housing project, your shovel's in the ground in 60 days, no entitlement process. It has created a private boom for developers to create this kind of housing without any sort of government subsidy, and it's been being approved very rapidly for the last 2 to 3 years. What I've said to people is on day one of the state legislature, I'm bringing a state version of ED1, which will incentivize you, if you do 100% affordable, you can have that shovel in the ground in 60 days, wipe out the entitlement process, and that's how we're going to actually give us a carrot to develop as opposed to a stick.
Thank you, Mike. We're going to switch questions. I know all of you want to answer this question, and for the audience, I know everyone wants to hear from all the candidates on all these questions. We will have time after the forum here for you guys to have one-on-one with the candidates, so feel free to ask them. I saw your hand up right here first. Please introduce yourself and answer.
Hi, my name is David. I guess as of late, one of the positive talking points I hear from the other side, they're always very critical about education and how there's place. But I guess more generally, I am just wondering, what are your guys' stances on what the state of California education is today and what direction you wanted to go towards?
Thank you, David. John, kick it off.
Well, this is why I'm endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California Faculty Association, most recently the California School Education Association, because I believe in expanding and fully funding our public schools, and I believe in if you have a charter school, to hold them to the same standards that public schools have to face, because we are seeing charter schools get away with literally our tax dollars, whereas public education is being held to a standard that even those in charter schools won't go. How did we get away with that one? And we are facing a time where teachers are facing the same affordability crisis that we're talking about. Teachers are traveling and not living in the communities in which they actually serve, which is a problem, so they're getting up even earlier, they're working longer hours. We have not seen a salary bump of any meaningful increase in any way, shape, or form, because we're really seeing our teachers face a budgetary crisis that was manufactured before they probably even accepted their job, because we continue to de-invest in public education. And as a public education person myself, has fought back against charter school expansion when I was in Wisconsin, when Scott Walker was doing everything he was trying to do way back then. I know I haven't said that name in a while, but that shivers down many of our spines. I really wanted to make sure that when we look at someone who's in this seat, they come from education. I actually came to California to be an educator. I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. I wanted to teach college and wanted to be a faculty member, and then the tenure system was completely decimated. Our school systems are completely decimated. I mean, when I really look back at what I would be making by working at 4 different universities, it would be barely what I was making when I started as an intern in the city council offices in the city of West Hollywood. That is a shocking revelation, but that is something that everyone is facing every day. And that's ultimately, when we look at education, it's time to make sure that billionaires, and I sound like Bernie Sanders here, but billionaires and mega corporations are paying their fair share of taxes. It goes back to public education.
Thank you, John.
The role of government really is to make people's lives better and to set the table for the next generations, right? So education is a critical part of that, and we need to do better. And I think, there's a lot of ways we need to do better. I think especially changing the funding formula to more fully fund our community colleges is incredibly important. Smoothing out and increasing the funding for our K through 12, or I guess it's now TK through 12, is incredibly important. And we also need to work on cutting the amount of reporting that educators have to do so that they can focus on their teaching requirements, and so schools can not waste a ton of time reporting data that may or may not get used by anyone. So education is incredibly important, it's a huge priority. I'm going to make sure it's fully funded, and I'm going to work on revenue mechanisms to make that happen.
Thank you, Ellen.
So after public safety, K through 12 education is the most important thing the state does. It's absolutely the most. Our schools used to be the envy of the nation. We are now underperforming Mississippi and Alabama in our third grade reading scores. Why am I singling out third grade reading? Nick Kristof from the New York Times singled it out the other day. This is a critical marker. If you follow the data, if a child cannot read at grade level at the end of third grade, they never really catch up. And that child is disadvantaged for years, if not for life. We have to fund the systems and strategies that will make sure that our kids are actually reading and succeeding at the critical markers like third grade. Number two, we have to deal with the chronic absenteeism that exploded during COVID and hasn't fully receded. Sacramento was congratulating itself that we've gone from 3x the number of kids who are chronically truant to double compared to where we were in 2019. That is an unacceptable outcome. You cannot help a kid if they are not in school. Number three, we should reward excellence wherever it is. If it's in a public school, that is fantastic. If it's in a charter school that meets high standards, that is fantastic too. Parlos Niños, if you visited it on Skid Row, does the Lord's work. They are a charter school with wraparound services for kids of homeless people and working parents who are facing some of the toughest circumstances in life. We should reward what's working. And finally, our teachers are heroes. We should reward excellent teachers, and we should make workforce housing a key part of the package so that teachers can live in the communities they serve, so that firefighters and police officers and other public servants can live and invest in the communities they serve as well.
Thank you, Brian. Before we get to the next question, the gentleman came up and asked me what RENA is. Just to clarify for the audience, RENA is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It is the number of units that the state is requiring each city to zone for and incentivize to build as part of their 8-year housing plan. Just to clarify that. Next question.
Thank you all for being here. I know it's a huge investment in your time, so we all appreciate it. I work a lot in homelessness in the region, and the South Bay has done a significant amount in addressing homelessness. And what I have found, though, is that we're all trying to do everything, and I think that leaves us in a place that we don't do anything well. And I'm talking regionally in the state as well. And so my question is and I'll preface this with, I think cities do outreach really well. We know our cities, we know where people are. So that, as an example, I think cities should be responsible for that type of outreach and in the system. But my question to all of you is, what do you think the state's role is in the entire system of homelessness? What will you bring to the efforts in the South Bay?
Thank you. We're going to start with Eric, and then we're going to get some background to Zennon.
Thank you very much for that question, Paige. And those of you who've heard me speak before, I often cite the city of Redondo Beach for the great things that have been done there. So a couple of comments. As the Chief Operating Officer of a public health company, I'm frequently out in the field talking to our homeless. And certainly the mental health crisis is so intersectional that we need to think about multifaceted ways that we can meet the needs of those that are out in the community. So how do we find a humane way to do it? Obviously, there's been a lot of investment, particularly by the county. The trouble is, programmatically, it's gotten unwieldy, and money is being thrown at the problem without the sophistication, the policy evaluation of really understanding what is it that we're investing in, is it producing the actual results that we need. Using the city of Redondo Beach as an example, with the outdoor care courts, the transitional housing capacity, thinking about acute capacity within the mental health space, and coordinating all these efforts is the key, I think, to solution. And having talked to many of these homeless people myself throughout LA County, Coachella Valley, and in the Riverside area, I can tell you trust is the ultimate challenge, getting them to believe and trust in the system. So to the question, Paige, that you posed, I think the role that the state can play is certainly establishing a policy framework, making sure that there's proper investment and supplementation to what's happening in the cities. As somebody that led multiple budgets in my own city, I can tell you a lot of our cities aren't overfunded. There isn't a lot of excess capacity, so that investment needs to be made. But it needs to be made intelligently. I spoke to Sheriff Luna recently, and there's this opportunity, I think, for us to be thinking about how do we sort of synchronize the experience for our homeless. And again, homelessness is very intersectional with mental health, as well as at times some of those folks that are dealing with rehabilitation issues as well. So I think the state can play a fundamental role in helping establish, I'll call it care campuses, in partnership with some of our public safety entities to ensure that there's capacity for our homeless in coordination for their needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
So the single most cost-effective investment that we can make in homelessness is preventing people from becoming homeless. It's that simple. And there's so much that the state can do to make sure that when people are facing eviction, people are facing rent hikes, that they are rapidly rehoused and are directed to other forms of housing before they end up on the street. That is the place that the state can especially step in with, for example, access to legal counsel to every tenant facing eviction. Additionally, when it comes to solving the crisis of people experiencing homelessness, the way the state does this right now is the state doesn't really do these things. The state gives money to nonprofits to then do these things. And that's how we see a lot of issues where you have conflicting nonprofits that are fighting over the same jurisdictions, that are fighting over the same responsibilities, where money goes into some ether and then we find out 2 years later that it was all spent on, executive compensation and other issues. And so what I propose is that we need to have the state actually step up and be the person delivering these services through local city providers, people that are accountable to the public, people that are accountable to transparency. We need to tackle these problems at scale, not just from a one-off situation, one by one, but we need to make sure while we're tackling it at scale, we deliver it at the local implementation level, because in the end, it is who you are talking to on the street, those individual in conversations that build trust within the community of people experiencing homelessness.
Thank you, Zennon.
Thank you. So, I can tell you what the solution isn't. It's not cutting every sector from the state budget across the board. Whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, all of those cuts across the board affect our most vulnerable communities first. And investing in the safety net, a system that I've worked in for 15 years, is an investment in California's infrastructure. People in our Senate district, one of the biggest complaints is, number one is affordability, but number two is there are so many unhoused people that are either in the district or around the district, and the impacts on the different neighborhoods. And you can't help those problems by cutting off all of the state-funded mechanisms to help those people and expect that those problems are going to get better. And so number one is we need funding, and we need to look at funding for these programs as an investment in infrastructure, and the best way out of a bad budget is investing in infrastructure. Number two is the safety net can work better, local government can work better, and the state can incentivize local government to work better. And I'll give you one quick example, is no-show rates at our hospital at Harbor UCLA. Unhoused people come from shelters, and 2 hours of a bus there, 2 hours of a bus back, and if they miss their appointment, they don't get an appointment next week, they get an appointment a year from now, and they're probably going to go to the ER before that. That goes for, the healthcare, that goes for mental health services, housing services. There are so many missed appointments and missed opportunities to make it easier for those unhoused people who really want services for themselves and their families to access those services. And the state has a role in incentivizing local government to do it better.
Thank you, Shai.
What's your position on Prop 13?
Thank you, Audrey. Start with Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey, appreciate it.
And for the audience, would you like to define the process?
Yeah, so Prop 13 is how you'll pay your property taxes. When you buy your property, it gets assessed at essentially a 1% a year tax of the value when you bought your property. So a lot of you here might have bought your property back in the 70s or 80s. You enjoyed a very low tax basis that you're now enjoying as you get older. And if we were to change Prop 13 to change those rates, you would have higher property taxes going forward, even though you might have your mortgage paid off, you might be on a fixed income. So Prop 13, I am opposed to touching it in any way, shape, or form. It would not only be extremely detrimental to older folks, of which I am rapidly getting there myself, so I have a lot of self-interest in it, but it would also create an extremely chilling effect on people who are doing transactions back and forth. It's like the same thing you got with Measure ULA, right? Everybody, okay, we're gonna put a mansion tax on things, and ULA sounds like a great idea, and it's gonna fund lots of stuff, and then you all of a sudden have Nithya Ramanakal people coming out and saying, well, maybe we need to reform ULA. You have these unintended consequences. One of the things we enjoy in California is Prop 13. Other states enjoy no state taxation. Other states enjoy a Homestead Act. If we were to turn Prop 13 on its head, the unintended consequences on seniors, working class people, people who have inherited a home and passed it down in generations, that's the only reason they can raise a family in a home, would be absolutely catastrophic. So 100%, I would not touch Prop 13.
Thank you, Mike. Sure.
John Erickson. So I believe that we need to look at reforming Prop 13. I think that the reason why we look at a lot of the prices and issues that we're dealing with today, it's a direct result of that. Look, I'm a renter. This is actually a pro-renter district, shockingly enough. And my landlord, who I have a great relationship with, bought his property in West Hollywood in 1973. And I gotta let you know, it's worth a lot more than what he bought it for, but he's still paying rents for what it was back then. And he's refusing to actually invest directly back into the building. And we're not talking like a brand new pool, self-parking garages. We're saying, can we just get a working gate? Right? I mean, we're not talking here, and Mike makes a good point. Seniors and individuals that this would be impacted by, we need to be very careful with how we actually do those things, because as you see with ULA and other things, they can have serious policy issues if it impacts around. But Prop 13 is and has gotten into a lot of the situations that we are right now. But we have seen attempts to change Prop 13 many times in the past. There's always some grand vision of how people want to do it, and it always back fails. And so we really need to look at what this does in coalitions, and it ultimately impacts how we fund our schools, how we fund our public safety, how we fund fire, things that actually you're already paying more for as a result of that way. So when we really want to come down to saving money in our pocketbooks, we have to be smart about it, and that's why I believe in reforming it. Thank you so much.
So there's a lot of factors that can threaten housing stability, increasing for homeowners, increasing insurance is one, increasing property taxes another. It's really important to keep people in their homes. Yet at the same time, a lot of people say that our education system went downhill when we passed Prop 13, right? So there's got to be some sort of happy medium. We need to keep people in their homes, but we need to figure out how to fund education. And I don't think that that's necessarily opposed. They're not in opposition. But I think there are some corporate tax loopholes in Prop 13 that need to be closed, and we should definitely do that. But I'm not in favor of, I think, changing Prop 13 for regular homeowners.
Thank you, Alan. We'll take another question.
Lynn from LA, West LA. How do you feel about the proposal to be on the ballot, the billionaire tax, 2026 billionaire tax?
Thank you, Lynn. Brian?
Hi, I'm opposed to the billionaire tax, and I'll tell you why. Number one, I think that in a state environment where the top 1% provide 40% of the revenue, it is a dangerous thing when you take the most privileged, the most mobile citizens, and you incent them to go to 49 other states. Our budget situation is tenuous as it is. I am not for a one-time tax. I would be for an ongoing tax reform where we're producing new revenue in a sustainable way over time. I also believe that new taxes should be combined with spending reform, because what we've seen in the past is sometimes revenues have increased, but the quality of public services haven't increased at the same time, and that's because you don't couple the new revenue with new oversight, new accountability on programs. And so, I am for extending Prop 30, Prop 55, the tax rates at the top end at what they are, those should not go down. I am for looking at other measures, as we discussed, potential reforms to corporate loopholes, other measures to make sure that people at the top are paying their fair share. It's outrageous that there are some billionaires who are paying a lower tax rate effectively than a teacher or a firefighter or a police officer. I think it's the right question to ask. How do we achieve the level of revenue, and how do we make sure that those at the top are paying what they should? I just think that this is the wrong solution to that, and when we have more time, perhaps afterwards, we can talk about some other, I think, more workable solutions.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate the question, and we were more than $300 billion in our state budget. There needs to be thoughts about how do we get additional revenue. To me, additional revenue, though, means first prioritizing economic development. Obviously, we have some exciting things happening over the next couple of years in the LA region, so how do we optimize that to ensure that the economy is producing the kind of sustainability, growth. We continue to see our property values increase, which I got to enjoy watching, at least in my own city, stabilize, stay stable, and continue to grow, which allowed us to provide some level of tax support and service over time. So economic development, efficiency in how we're spending money is rather important. As somebody that's been a 20-year plus executive in the healthcare space, who's evaluated different investments, I can tell you that it's not just spending extra money, it's making sure that you're getting quality produced by that. Similarly, in my dissertation to research work related to public education and having looked at systems similar to the local control funding formula across the nation, there are opportunities for us to make sure that our investments are being done properly. So we need to do economic development, we need to look at the efficiency of how we're spending money and ensure that it's programmatically producing the kind of results we want. Related to the billionaires tax specifically, I do have concerns that it will have the adverse effect of disincentivizing the kind of environment we want for our businesses in this community. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
I want to start off by saying I support the billionaires tax. Thank you. I support the billionaires tax because it actually is structured very well for preventing people from leaving this state. It's backdated to the beginning of this year. It's a one-time tax that makes sure that people that are seeking to leave California know it's a one-time thing. It's also, because of California's rules on residency, it's not going to be able for folks to get out of it very easily. It is actually the perfect response as we see untold amounts of wealth being generated in this country right now for the top wealthiest individuals to pay their fair shares while we're losing Medi-Cal, while we're losing food stamps access, while we're losing all these funding sources we so desperately need. And I think it's really interesting that it's coming on the heels of the Prop 13 question because the two are so intrinsically linked. In California, the way that we rely on tax revenue is it's all based on funding sources that are either good in good years or bad in bad years. And that's why we always see crazy surplus in California budget. Oh my God, we're in a crazy deficit. We don't have funding sources that are tied to long-term stable investments. We are tied entirely to these billionaires and whether they like this state or not. And that's why in many ways I do support Prop 13 reform. We should not be kicking seniors out of their homes. There need to be clear exemptions. But at the same point, let me give you a number. $250,000 on every single home in Los Angeles County. That amount is because purely of Prop 13. That is the asset inflation that Prop 13 results in because there is a turnover in the housing market. And as the same way that Disneyland is paying the same tax they paid in 1978, downtown parking lots are empty because landowners are able to sit on them for years and years and years because there is no penalty to keeping their land vacant. It is the exact same principles of vacancy tax, and I support reforming Prop 13, especially in the method of split roll as we saw in Prop 50 back in 2020.
Thank you. Fire away.
I'm going to ask you something a little outside of California, but it has to do with the military pay. The soldiers that fight for this country, they do a heck of a job, but when they get paid, some of their pay is taxed, not based upon where they're stationed, but where they live, where they were recruited. California has the highest tax rate. So if somebody lives here in California when they're recruited and is stationed in South Carolina, they're still paying the taxes that are here in California. What would you do about that situation?
Thank you. Jeff?
It's a good question. The first I'm hearing about this sort of situation, I mean, that seems like something that is legislated at a federal level in terms of residency requirements for soldiers where they are. And so, I can see it working both ways. Somebody from, a no-tax state coming, like Florida, and no state tax, and coming and being stationed in California. And so, how do you legislate that? You go to the lowest common denominator, and obviously revenue is involved. And so, I don't know that I have a great solution to that, but it goes both ways. I would just say that. If you're coming from California, you go to station in South Carolina, you're paying higher taxes, but going from Florida to California, sort of you're penalized the same way. And so, that's a good question. I don't have any great answer to that.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for the question. My brother is a captain in the Marines, is reserved now, obviously, and I'll tell you, I'm thinking on the fly here, but I gotta be honest with you, I can't think of any reason why somebody who has served this country at any time or continues to serve this country should pay anything higher than the lowest possible tax rate there is in this entire country. Whether or not a legislator in California can do something about that, I'd honestly have to look into it. But I would 100% be for the idea that if you are deriving military pay, that should be at the lowest possible taxable rate that anybody in this country pays. And it wouldn't have a big effect on revenue because the amount of people who serve actively in the military is a very small percentage. So even giving that heavy tax break, if you want to call it, to our servicemen and women would be something that they deserve, that they put their life on the line for. People like my brother put their lives on the line for, and I would support something like that 100%. So thanks for bringing it to my attention, because I'm going to go read about it and figure out about it now, what we can maybe do. I think that's a great issue to take up on behalf of our servicemen and women. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
You just said we've been getting questions we actually haven't been getting. We're all 64 forums. Don't spot up, as you know. So I want to thank you for that. I can feel my grandmother, who was in the Women's Auxiliary Corps at Pearl Harbor, staring down at me right now. She's the one that took me to our local food pantry in Ripon, Wisconsin, and said a fed community is a healthy community, right? And what we do to support our veterans. And there's nothing that we should take off the table to support our veterans. I mean, when we look at people who are actively serving as well as who have served, they are being taxed at other rates that they know about: healthcare, housing, mental health. All of the stuff that, when you think about serving the United States of America, should be provided for you. When you think about all my friends that came back from the Iraq War, that not only had lymphoma, some died because of suicide and mental health, the work that I know Supervisor Horvath's doing outside the VA, and the work that other council members have been doing to make sure that we're doing all that we can to support those individuals. And so I would look to my friends in those systems to help manage what we could do on this issue. I too don't know what role the state would have on that. It's the first time I've actually thought about that question. But I think you bring up an issue that we've all talked about, and that is the issue of we all have different groups of identities in which we belong to. And how are we all actually looking after each other? It's the same thing when we all have our council members, when we all had the fires, when we all had everything. I remember my council member and I, when Runyon was on fire, she called the Disabilities Advisory Board, I was calling the Senior Advisory Board. We all need to take care of each other more. And that's why I love California so much, because I think we think just like you all, and how are we actually taking care of each other more? And we're not doing that enough, and I really appreciate your question.
Thank you, John. I'm afraid that we've already gone pretty far over the program time that we had allotted for this, and I do want to make sure that, respectful of the candidates' time, that they also have time to talk to everybody, one-on-one. So I think with that, we're going to do one last rapid fire. This is going to be last question. Everybody gets 30 seconds per person, okay? You had his hand up earlier.
Yo, Joe, I serve as school board, very proud board member of Rapid Beach West School District, best one in Southern California. A lot of school board members, educators, parents, grandparents here. It's an absolutely important issue. I know it was raised earlier. I want to know, we want to know how you would fix funding issue for public schools. It's crazy, and please give all the other fluffs. Get to how you would fix Prop 98 and LCMF. Thank you.
You heard the man. Everybody's going to answer this question. Starting with you, Ellen. You got 30 seconds, and I'll keep you accountable.
I mean, I think we need to look at different funding streams for funding public schools, because the funding formulas we have aren't working, and I think we need to look at bringing, just overall growing our revenue, training people for good jobs, bringing in new businesses, and funding our whole system of education, healthcare, everything better, and with a smoother budget cycle.
Thank you, Ellen.
It is important to fund socioeconomic disadvantage. It is also important to fund excellence. It is also important to fund the wraparound services that are critical to the success of every kid in every school district. It is also very important that we look at the efficacy of the strategies that school districts are using. Give them the flexibility and the freedom to try things that are working in other cities and other states. Reward them for tactics that raise student achievement. The K-12 system in California used to be about excellence. We should hold ourselves, we should get to the goal of #1 in the nation again.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for the question, Good to see you. I would dispute Palos Verdes up there as well. Appreciate that question. As a school board member, we recently approved a $300 million bond. So one of the challenges, and this has been a deep part of my educational research, as I mentioned, I've evaluated and spoken to and interviewed state board leaders, school board leaders, principals from all over the country, sort of looking at what are the best systems. And as it relates to our current system, there is significant discrepancy. Unfortunately, for the sake of most of our coastal communities were left behind, $13,000 per pupil versus $20,000 per pupil is the discrepancy. We need to look at that and figure out how to get money to our local school districts.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for the great
Well, I never thought I'd talk so much about Prop 13 in one night. But Prop 13 slashed the budget for schools by 60% when it was passed over in the state of California. And if you want to think about refunding schools and making sure that they have the funding they need, you need property tax reform. That is how school funding happens. And we also, especially in terms of how we fund schools in the post-COVID era where we see chronic absenteeism, there's a lot of issues with how our local control funding works where we give schools funding based on absences. And because so many underserved schools are having such high chronic absences, those very same schools are now facing severe deficits when it comes to providing their students. So we need to do better on that.
The funding formulas, as a community college trustee, I know, the funding formulas are designed to decrease the amount that the state pays to public schools, pays to community colleges. They try to incentivize quality, but it doesn't really work. It really just ends up tanking schools unjustly. And so, number one, yes, enrollment-based funding for schools is something that is important, not attendance-based funding. And then for higher education, we need significant reform to the way the funding works.
Thanks for the question, Young. First of all, Prop 98 can't be the floor where it is. We have to raise the floor on that. We have to have more Prop 98 funding. How do we do that? Well, I am not for changing Prop 13. I'm for adding to the basis of how we create our Prop 13 taxes. Right now, we have a state density bonus. You can build more units if you build affordable rental units, correct? We all know about this. We need a state density bonus if you build for sale units. We need to add hundreds of thousands and millions of for sale units to our property tax rolls to increase our Prop 13 money without actually raising the taxes senior citizens and folks will have to pay when they've owned their house for 30, 40 years. Build more housing that is part of the Prop 13 base. Raise the floor of Prop 98. Thanks. Sorry, Eric. Had to do it.
Funding formula changes and Prop 13 reform. I mean, really, if we're going to do anything, it's Prop 13 reform. I mean, we've been talking about this for decades. It's been put to the ballot. It's been defeated at the ballot. We try to do it in the legislature. Anyone that tells you anything different is straight up lying to you. It's Prop 13 reform. That's what's actually going to bring about systematic change within our education systems.
All right. Ellen, you kicked it off, right? Okay, great. Well, on behalf of the Beach Cities Democrats, I really appreciate all of you taking your time to be here. We're going to have a little bit of club business, but again, I mean, we're rounding the corner on 250 years of our republic, and nothing symbolizes that better than having you guys all here sharing your thoughts with our members in an open primary. This is not a predestined race. Any of you could be our next state senator, and we really appreciate the opportunity to have you hear our voices, our concerns, and we look forward to working with one of you once you're elected. Thank you. We will have a very rapid fire of club business.